You ever wonder why, in so many relationships, the physical side seems to take center stage for guys? Let's be real. This question makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It stirs up assumptions, stereotypes, and even insecurities. But today, I don't want to shy away from it. I want to lean in. Because when we actually start to understand why so many boys chase the physical aspect in a relationship, we begin to uncover something much deeper. It's not just about biology. It's not just about hormones. It's about validation. It's about connection. It's about what they were never taught to express. From a young age, boys are often taught to suppress their emotions. Phrases like man up, don't cry, or be strong are drilled into them, often with the best intentions, to make them resilient, confident, or tough. But the hidden cost of this upbringing is that many boys grow up without the tools to express vulnerability, fear, love, or emotional intimacy in a healthy way. While girls are generally encouraged to talk about their feelings, form emotional bonds, and explore their inner world, boys are often subtly or overtly discouraged from doing the same. This emotional suppression becomes so deeply ingrained that by the time boys reach adolescence and begin forming romantic relationships, they may not even be aware of the emotional language they're missing. Without emotional fluency, many boys struggle to connect on deeper levels in a relationship. They may genuinely care, they may want connection, but they don't know how to show it, or worse, they don't know what it should feel like. As a result, they gravitate toward what feels tangible, accessible, and validating: physical intimacy. Touch becomes a proxy for affection. Sex becomes a way to feel close, to feel needed, to feel something. In the absence of emotional vocabulary, the body becomes the only language they know how to speak fluently. This is not because boys are inherently more physical or less emotional, but because they've been taught to lead with physicality and bottle up everything else. The tragedy is that this conditioning creates a massive disconnect. While one person in the relationship may seek emotional presence, open communication, or shared vulnerability, the boy may respond with gestures of physical affection, thinking it's the same thing. And when this doesn't fulfill the emotional needs of the other person, both sides end up feeling misunderstood. The girl may feel objectified while the boy may feel rejected, when in reality, both are craving the same thing: connection. But what's even more complicated is that these boys often feel ashamed for wanting to be physical. They know society judges them for it. They get labeled as shallow, selfish, or emotionally unavailable. But few people take the time to ask why this behavior is happening in the first place. It's not simply about desire. It's about conditioning. It's about the absence of tools, not the absence of depth. They were never given permission to explore their emotions, so they default to what they were allowed to explore: the physical. In many ways, their desire to be physical isn't just about pleasure. It's a silent cry for connection. They want to be close to someone, to feel seen, to feel safe. But without the training to approach that emotionally, they chase it through physicality. And when it doesn't satisfy their deeper need, they feel confused and empty without knowing why. This cycle repeats itself, often unnoticed, and becomes a default pattern in relationships. For many boys, physical intimacy becomes the easiest and most immediate way to experience closeness in a relationship. It's a shortcut, not because they're lazy or shallow, but because they often don't know the longer route. When you grow up in a world that rarely encourages you to explore or express your inner world, you don't learn how to build emotional intimacy step by step. You don't learn how to sit in discomfort, talk about your fears, or ask the kind of vulnerable questions that create trust over time. Instead, you find a path that feels more direct, one that lets you feel desired, accepted, and emotionally connected, even if only for a moment. That path for many boys is physical intimacy. Physical touch is powerful. It can calm the nervous system, release oxytocin, and make someone feel deeply bonded, even in the absence of words. For a boy who hasn't been taught how to bond emotionally, physical closeness becomes a kind of emotional translator. A kiss becomes proof that he matters. Sex becomes a way of saying, "I'm connected to you." even if that connection hasn't been built on trust or shared vulnerability. This doesn't mean that every boy is consciously using sex to replace emotional work. Most aren't aware of the deeper psychological patterns playing out. They just know that when they're close to someone physically, they feel something real, and when that's taken away, they feel a sense of emptiness or distance they can't explain. This shortcut to intimacy also becomes reinforced by experience. If a boy expresses vulnerability and is met with confusion, criticism, or indifference, but then expresses desire and is met with attention, he learns which behaviors get results. He starts to equate physical pursuit with connection. Over time, this reinforces the idea that emotional closeness comes after or only through physical closeness. The emotional becomes secondary or even optional. The physical becomes the tool to unlock closeness rather than the result of it. This pattern is also supported by the way relationships are portrayed in media, movies, TV shows, music. They often highlight the physical moments as the peak of romantic tension. We don't often see characters spending long hours learning to communicate, working through their emotional wounds, or building intimacy through deep listening. Instead, we see passion explode into physicality as the ultimate expression of love. Boys, just like girls, absorb these messages. They learn that touch is how you prove affection, how you win someone over, how you feel less alone. And without anyone showing them how to go deeper, they settle for what's available. It's not that boys don't want emotional connection, they do. But when you don't know how to build a bridge with words, you start building it with your body. When you're not taught the value of emotional intimacy, you reach for what feels immediate, what gives you validation in the moment. Physical intimacy becomes that shortcut, the fast track to feeling loved, even if the feeling. Society has long defined masculinity through a very narrow lens, often equating it with dominance, stoicism, and sexual conquest. From early adolescence, boys are bombarded with messages that their worth is tied to how desirable they are, how many girls they can attract, and how experienced they are physically. These expectations create enormous pressure to perform, not just sexually, but as a man who is validated by his physical success in relationships. This isn't about personal desire as much as it's about proving something to friends, to the world, and sometimes to themselves. Being physical in a relationship becomes less about genuine connection and more about meeting an invisible standard that's been set for them by culture. In many social circles, boys are praised for being physically active in relationships. They are celebrated for scoring or winning over a girl, reinforcing the idea that intimacy is a competition or an achievement rather than a mutual experience. At the same time, emotional openness is often viewed as weakness or vulnerability, something to be avoided or even ridiculed. So, to preserve their social image, boys may suppress their need for emotional intimacy and instead emphasize the physical because that's what earns them respect among their peers. This performance of masculinity becomes so ingrained that many boys start to internalize it, confusing it with their true identity and desires. The pressure to meet this masculine ideal can be suffocating. Boys are expected to take initiative, to always be confident, and to never show hesitation or emotional confusion. In the context of relationships, this translates into the belief that they must always want sex, must always lead with physical interest, and must never admit to needing emotional connection or comfort. These unrealistic standards strip them of the freedom to explore relationships on their own terms. Instead, they become actors in a script that doesn't reflect who they are, but what they believe they're supposed to be. This societal conditioning doesn't just affect how boys view themselves, it also influences how they interpret relationships. If masculinity is equated with physical success, then a relationship without physical progression may feel like failure. A lack of physical intimacy may be misread as rejection, inadequacy, or a blow to their ego. Rather than seeing relationships as spaces for mutual growth and emotional safety, they may come to view them as arenas for validation where being wanted physically is the ultimate proof of worth. Even those who are aware of this pressure often feel trapped by it. They may crave deeper conversations, emotional vulnerability, and real connection, but worry that deviating from the masculine script will make them look weak or undesirable. So they stay silent. They act out the role expected of them, and over time, they begin to associate love and closeness only with physical affirmation, because that's the only type of intimacy that aligns with the version of masculinity they've been taught to pursue. From a very young age, boys are exposed to media that heavily emphasizes physical attraction and sexual conquest as central to romantic relationships. Whether it's movies, music videos, social media influences, or advertisements, the recurring theme is that love and desire revolve around appearance and physical chemistry. In most mainstream content, men are portrayed as constantly pursuing women, with the physical aspect of the relationship taking priority over emotional connection. These portrayals shape young minds, creating unrealistic expectations about what relationships should look like and how they should function. When boys grow up watching stories where physical intimacy is the climax of a relationship arc, they begin to internalize the belief that it is not only essential but also the main goal. This influence is even more intense in the age of digital media, where explicit content is easily accessible and often consumed before boys have any real-life relationship experience. Pornography, in particular, delivers a highly distorted version of intimacy, one that is purely physical, often lacking any form of emotional context or communication. As a result, many boys start to view physical intimacy as something transactional or performative rather than as a mutual expression of affection and connection. They may enter relationships expecting the same dynamic they've seen on screen, unaware that real intimacy requires trust, patience, and emotional presence. Social media adds another layer to this distortion. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat are filled with idealized images of couples, often highlighting the most attractive, physically affectionate moments. This creates a culture of comparison, where boys may feel pressure to replicate those moments in their own relationships to feel validated or accepted. Likes, comments, and public displays of affection become metrics of success. In this environment, the emotional aspects of a relationship take a back seat to what can be shown, captured, and shared. The result is a generation of boys who may prioritize physical milestones not because they're emotionally ready, but because they believe that's what a successful relationship looks like. The media also rarely provides role models who demonstrate emotional intelligence in relationships. Instead, male characters are often praised for being dominant, emotionally detached, or successful in their physical pursuits, while vulnerability is either mocked or ignored. This lack of representation leaves boys without guidance on how to build meaningful, emotionally rich connections. They're left to fill in the gaps with what they've seen and heard, which more often than not centers on the physical rather than the emotional. Even in music, which is a powerful influence during teenage years, many popular songs glorify physical desire while glossing over emotional substance. The language of lust is loud, while the language of love is quiet or absent. Boys absorb these messages, often subconsciously, and begin to equate love with possession, passion with dominance, and intimacy with touch. The emotional depth of a relationship becomes secondary if it's acknowledged at all. Insecurity is one of the most overlooked reasons behind why many boys seek physical intimacy in relationships. On the surface, it may seem like confidence, like they're in control and know what they want, but beneath that surface is often a deep uncertainty about their own worth. For many boys, physical affection becomes a way to silence self-doubt. Being desired physically feels like proof that they are enough, that they matter, that they're lovable. When they haven't developed a stable sense of identity or self-esteem, they begin to rely on external validation, and nothing feels more immediate and affirming than being wanted by someone else in a physical way. The teenage years and early adulthood are full of insecurities. Boys are dealing with changes in their bodies, pressure to fit in socially, expectations from family, and internal questions about who they are. They may not feel good enough, attractive enough, or successful enough. In a world that rarely encourages them to talk about these insecurities openly, many boys learn to mask them. Some do it through humor, some through aggression, and others through physical intimacy. When someone wants them physically, it soothes the voice in their head that says they're not valuable. It becomes less about desire for the other person and more about needing reassurance. This dynamic often creates confusion in relationships. A boy might be overly focused on physical touch, not because he sees the other person as an object, but because that's the only way he knows how to feel secure. If physical affection is withheld, he might interpret it not as a boundary, but as rejection. His self-worth becomes tangled with how much affection he receives, how often, and how intensely. This makes the relationship more fragile because instead of feeling grounded in mutual trust and understanding, it becomes a constant search for reassurance through touch. Insecurity also leads to fear. Fear of losing the other person, fear of not being enough, fear of emotional exposure. Physical intimacy feels safer than emotional vulnerability because it doesn't require opening up the same internal wounds. You don't have to talk about your past, your fears, or your shame in order to kiss someone. You don't have to be emotionally naked to be physically close. So for boys who are unsure of themselves or afraid to be seen for who they truly are, physicality becomes the safer route. It lets them feel wanted without having to take the emotional risk of being truly known. In many cases, boys aren't even aware that they're acting out of insecurity. They've just learned that when they are close to someone physically, they feel calmer, more confident, more alive. But that sense of validation is temporary, and when the moment fades, the insecurity returns, sometimes stronger than before. This cycle can become addictive, constantly seeking touch to keep self-doubt at bay without ever addressing the root of the insecurity. Beneath the surface of many boys' desire for physical intimacy lies a deeper, often unspoken need, the desire to feel connected, understood, and emotionally safe. While it may appear that boys are primarily driven by physical urges, the truth is that many are longing for something far more profound, a sense of belonging. In a world where boys are rarely encouraged to express their emotions or be vulnerable, physical closeness becomes the most accessible and acceptable way to experience connection. It becomes the only language many feel permitted to speak when trying to express love, affection, or need. Physical intimacy offers immediate feedback. A hug, a kiss, or simply being close to someone can provide a rush of warmth and closeness that feels like emotional bonding. For boys who haven't been taught to seek or express emotional closeness in other ways, these moments can feel like the only times they are truly seen or valued. They may not have the tools to say, "I feel lonely" or "I want to be understood," but through physical touch, they attempt to meet those same needs. It's not about lust in isolation. It's about using the physical to fulfill a deep emotional hunger. This emotional need is compounded by the lack of safe spaces for boys to open up. From childhood, many boys are discouraged from talking about their feelings or showing weakness. Emotional expression is often met with discomfort, mockery, or dismissal. So instead of learning how to share their fears or articulate their desires for closeness, they internalize the belief that they must be self-reliant and emotionally detached. But human beings are wired for connection, and that need doesn't disappear, it just finds a different outlet. For many boys, that outlet becomes physical intimacy, which feels like a rare chance to be close to someone without needing to break the emotional silence they've been conditioned to keep. Even in relationships where emotional intimacy is possible, some boys still default to the physical because they haven't practiced the other forms. They may not know how to ask meaningful questions, how to listen deeply, or how to respond to emotional cues. This doesn't mean they don't care. It means they are still learning how to care in ways that go beyond what they've been shown. Touch becomes their fallback method, the one area where they feel confident expressing affection and receiving it. Over time, this pattern can become mistaken for shallowness or a lack of emotional depth. Partners may feel that the boy is only interested in one thing, when in reality, he is reaching for something much more human, the need to feel close. But because that closeness is sought primarily through physical means, the emotional needs often go unmet or unacknowledged. This can lead to frustration on both sides, where neither person feels fully understood despite the physical connection they share. The deeper emotional connection remains underdeveloped, not for lack of desire, but from lack of experience, guidance, and emotional safety.